Mongolia, actually, what's unique about Mongolia was, as much as we kind of think Mongolia, China, Asian, Mongolia is much more aligned with Russia and became a Russian satellite country, not so much part of the Soviet Union, but part of the Soviet bloc, much like you would see Bulgaria or Czech Republic might be. And so there's a strong Russian tie. And so the capital of Ulaanbaatar was a nomadic capital until the last 100 years. And the Russians came in and said, now we're going to put stakes down. And they built the Russian building. So if you've seen pictures of Russia, you've seen what Ulaanbaatar looks like. A lot of prefabricated concrete homes that are built in block form, and you piece them together in different ways. There's maybe 5 to 6 flavors of buildings throughout Ulaanbaatar, at least at the time. There's definitely built some more Western buildings now, but still a large percentage looks like a Russian city. And so there's Russian infrastructure with central heat through the whole city, tram system, buses. So Ulaanbaatar, the main capital, looks like a very Russian town. Now, what makes it unique is that half of the population of Mongolia is still nomadic, and half of Ulaanbaatar still lives in tents. The English word is borrowed from Russian is yurt, but we're pushing for ger, which is the Mongolian word, and we still call it ger. Yurt's too Russian. But it's those round tents you see with kind of a fence around the outside, and then some poles coming out made of fleece, and you put your stove in there. It's very comfortable, nice space to live, actually. And so that's a traditional nomadic dwelling you see in the countryside. People live in those, but also in the city, people have their land, build a wall around it, and put 1 or 2 different gers in this area. You'll have your 2 tents, you'll have a train, a place to park your car maybe, and so you have a ger village on the outside, which, in some cases is more, poverty-style living. In other cases, it's actually not. Some are actually quite nice. And so you have apartment living, which is where the missionaries stayed. We were actually very gung-ho to live in a tent. And when we first got called, we dug into National Geographic and saw pictures of all these exotic places. Well, of course, National Geographic is going to show the exotic as opposed to perhaps the more mundane apartment. So I lived in an apartment most of the time, all the time. I stayed in a tent a couple nights for fun. But we had apartment living. We took taxis and buses. What was unique of Mongolia at the time, it probably still is now, is that any car is a taxi. So you put your hand out and you wave your hand. If the car stops, it's a taxi. And there was a fixed rate known throughout the city. Never saw something change. They put on the radio and say, the new rate is so many tugrks per kilometer. And so you'd open the door and you'd say, hey there, how much per kilometer is what that meant. And they'd say the going rate, you hop in. If they said $3, you'd say, no thanks, goodbye. And you make sure you agree upon the rate, and they'd take you somewhere. They might say, yeah, I'm not going that way, and drive off, wait for the next car. So, and at the time, Mongolia is much more crowded now, a lot of cars, but at the time, there's very few cars there. And so finding a car was difficult. Buses were a good way to travel, though they were very, very packed. So we travel in buses, and Ulaanbaatar itself is only, I think, 7 miles by 2 miles. It's not a very big city. And Irnet and Darkhan are much smaller, and then all the zones are smaller than that. So cars is the main transportation, but motorcycles a little bit here and there. I never saw any bikes, which was interesting. The horses are still very common, especially as you get more remote. Very horse riding population, so you might see people come by in horse. The city, not as much, just too much traffic, but you get more in the outskirts, and people are still riding horses around quite a bit. I don't know if any missionaries have tracked on horse yet. We advocated that, but I don't know if that ever happened. So living was electricity, hot and cold running water most of the time. Relatively comfortable.